Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. This is our first episode of Unfiltered IT. As you can see, I have a guest with me here. Uh, really, the point of this podcast and webcast is to familiarize people with a handful of technology concepts. I have a great expert colleague and friend with me here, Rick Mishka, and we're going to get into that here in a minute when I'll let him make his introductions. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. As we go through this process, you'll have access to these slides after the presentation. If you reach out to me, there's a QR code at the end of the podcast that will allow you to get that information. Also, this will be available both as a email that comes out later with a link to review this, the recording, but as well, it'll be available in a playlist on currently YouTube, and we are working on getting there with Spotify. So with that, let me kick it off with a little bit of introductions here. Everybody knows probably who I am. I am the CTO and Chief Architect for Higher Information Group as well. I sit on the board for Harrisburg University's AI project. And apart from some other things as well in the technology field that are not necessarily related to the podcast. And I will let Rick introduce himself here. But Rick is a cybersecurity SME, FSE with Avant Communications. So Rick, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, for sure. These are always the tough things, like, hey, introduce yourself. So yeah, Rick Mishka. I have been on an amazing journey in cybersecurity for a while. I've done some AI product builds. I've done, investigations. That's how I got my start. Most people get their start in the SOC, but I got my start in investigations. I'm excited for today's topic more than anything because I actually initially was in the military for 7 years as a special operations sergeant, and everything is acronyms, right? SOF and all these other crazy acronyms. And so talking about acronyms today is going to be fun just because I think we've gotten so lazy that we just acronymed everything out and we move forward from there. But yeah, I'm excited to work with you again, Chris. I know we've had a couple of these in the past, and I think it's just a great opportunity just to educate the world.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. The technology space is ever changing, and I think you guys. I am not a military guy, but I think there's a mantra that you all have that's very similar to this. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when you'll get attacked. And I think there's something along the lines of a preparation statement that you guys have. You might be able to fill in the blanks for that one on me, but I have some buddies who are part of the military who have said those types of things to me before. So, really, honing in on preparedness, being ready for these types of things to occur.
I think people forget that everyone is eventually a target. I mean, it could be as simple as I checked my personal email this morning and I had two very, very well worded phishing emails that, hey, Rick, I'm going to be in Montana. I'd love to buy you coffee, but I wasn't able to grab your phone number because I have a new phone. Oh man, like instantly you're going, do I know this person? Do I want to go have coffee with them? Right? Do I want to get some dinner? And I think people forget that customers, businesses, they forget that I'm the little guy, I'm the person, I'm the human, I'm the small fish. It is truly a matter of if, and it's easier if you're prepared for the if to happen than for you to hope that something doesn't happen.
Well, it's funny you should say that. So, these are just a handful of statistics that I pulled from a couple of different locations. Sources are there at the bottom of the slide, but you talk about, Rick, those phishing emails. Human factors account for 74% of breaches last year. Yeah, some of these are just staggering. 70% of ransomware targets SMB. You had talked about, am I a target? Am I not a target? Do I have to be concerned about being a target? I think that number tells us everybody should be concerned about being a target. And you spoke about that phishing email. 57% of organizations experience a phishing attempt on a weekly or daily basis. I think another one that's interesting, you and I being part of the technology environment, we see this big conversation around move to cloud, move to cloud. It's safer to be in cloud. But one of the interesting bullets that I have here is 27% of businesses encounter a security breach in their cloud infrastructure. So I really do think, with some of these statistics, it is about preparation and how to effectively utilize those tools. I mean, I don't disagree. Is cloud a more secure place to be for most people? Probably. But not if it's misconfigured, not if it's not configured correctly. And so, the thought process there is effectiveness of your security tool depends on how it's configured and managed. We've seen this before. I'll equate this to a car or a house for 50 years, standing there with people living in it and working on it and performing that routine maintenance will stand there for another 50, 100 years. As everybody knows, a house that sits empty or a car that sits unrunning, probably not going to last all that long in the elements. And it's the same concept here. And Rick, this is an interesting slide. I know we've talked about this before. I hear a lot of people, you hear those old adages like nobody ever gets fired for buying IBM or nobody ever got fired for buying Cisco or things like that. And, I get into conversations with people in the industry, colleagues all the time about, oh, well, I would never buy that because of XYZ logo on the side of it. It's a pretty staggering slide. And what it's basically showing is the efficacy of those devices when they're configured to best practice versus when they're pulled out of the box and thrown in a rack.
I mean, look at Cisco specifically on that one, right? Just out of box, off the shelf. It doesn't seem to block any malware because it doesn't know what to block. You haven't trained it on anything, but then you say, okay, let's do best practice configurations, 100%. Now, I would argue that 100% is likely looking at known threats. There's obviously unknown threats that might get through, but that's still impressive. And I think people forget that when you buy a tool, the tool is a tool. It can be changed at any point in time. I mean, we've seen that with endpoint detection and response tools, right? CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Microsoft Defender are leading the charge, but it used to be carbon black. It used to be silence. And those tools either grow or falter by the process and the people that run them. And I think that's the more important part. If you don't have the people to run the tool or to set up the process, the tool is 0%.
Yeah, and I mean this is pretty across the board. I think the exception here might be Fortinet's out-of-box configuration, but I know from past experience that when Fortinet device is pulled out of the box, it does require a level of kind of wizard to go through. So they're basically pushing you into an out-of-the-box best practice configuration from the time that you implement it.
Yeah. I think that's the interesting part is I think if you purchase a tool, wouldn't you want to wizard it up? Wouldn't you want to set it up? So now you might miss, and talking about the cloud side, most people will download an AWS E3 bucket, or they'll spin up a dev environment, and they just follow whatever AWS says when you spin it up. But that doesn't mean Amazon or Microsoft Azure or any of those are protecting you. They're simply saying, here's how you do the spin up of this server. Now you have to configure it. And you showed the math, you showed the percentages. The big issue with the hybrid workforce is two things. One, hybrid cloud environments are nearly 98% of all environments today. Whether you agree or disagree, you have some form of hybrid cloud. And the other piece of that is most of it's software as a service. And people think that their end user license agreement, they're offloading or transferring their risk to this software as a service, and they're not. The software as a service, if you read that EULA, that end user license agreement, tells you that you are liable for your own data.
Definitely, if you want to look at an eye chart, I recommend go take a look at the Trust Center on Microsoft. It's one giant Excel document that shows who's responsible for what, and I can tell you the column for the managed services, the managed service provider, or the end customer, much larger than the column that Microsoft is responsible for.
Right.
So with that, I mean, we kind of touched on it. The complexities of the security world today are just that. It's a complex network that customers, IT directors, security teams, they all have to navigate. You know, thousands of tools out there, varying levels of quality on those tools, but even at the top, the tools that all work the same, there's 6 to 10 different options at a minimum for each one of these. Unique challenges for those diverse tools. You know, they have to work across multiple platforms, across multiple environments, across different workflows. Complexity over time as an infrastructure ages, you and I both know, you know, that's that tacit versus implicit knowledge. As an environment ages, people who sit there as the environment ages and works on the environment, they have a level of understanding that's not there when you bring a security vendor in. That's not there when you bring a consultant in. And expanding beyond just the tools, it's how does that integrate with all of my other platforms? How does that integrate with my apps that aren't in my perimeter, aren't in my control? How does that integrate with, you know, my instance of Salesforce, my instance of HubSpot, any of those things that are kind of out of the real management purview of a security or an IT director on a day-by-day basis?
I think a lot of companies, they look at that and they instantly freeze because it is complex, but they're making more complex business decisions every day on other areas of the business that take away the technical jargon, take away the weird acronyms, right? And you're simply making another business decision about resilience, continuity, something important. And I think if businesses just step back a little bit and take out some of the jargon, they'll find that this is a far easier process.
Agreed, but you touched on the jargon. Let's talk about the jargon.
Let's dig in.
The alphabet soup that we see here of, and by all means, I don't think this is a comprehensive list of cybersecurity acronyms, but just there's, you know, VPN, there's software defined perimeter, there's advanced threat protection, identity management, privilege access management. The list just goes on and on and on. And I think you and I have a very similar outlook to this. At some level, I care very minimally about these acronyms. You know, I'm not going to get excited over SOC versus NOC. I'm really looking for outcomes, and I think you work very similar to that. And as you stated, let's step back and have a business conversation. What's the business outcome? Are we purely trying to check a compliancy box on a cyber insurance rider policy? Or are we actually looking to solidify the environment? Is it something in between that? Do we want to make sure that we can sleep at night? I joke about it being almost like a moving of the risk ball. You know, where can I move the risk ball so that I'm not holding the risk ball when something happens?
It's the hot potato game, right?
Exactly. Rick, is there any of these that really stick out to you as far as kind of navigating this ecosystem? I mean, I have one that I would say sticks out when it comes to navigating the security ecosystem, but you know, I'll defer that question to you initially.
Yeah, so there's a couple on here that I really like to soapbox about, and then there's one that's not on there, and so I'll kind of hit both of those sides of it. For me, I think the easiest path to withstanding and being proactive in your reaction is some form of detection or response, whether it's endpoint, whether it's managed, whether it's extended. Kick out the marketing and figure out what you need those tools to do, right? You know, we understand what endpoint detection and response does. We're a little muddy on what managed detection and response should do. Same thing with extended detection and response. And so what I tell people is that is the core to having the most proactive reaction when something happens. But you're only as good as your IRP, your incident response plan. That's an acronym that we didn't throw on here by design because most people don't know what it is. They might think of it as a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan, but Incident response plan is very specific to this, the cyber or the digital side of the house. If you have one, if it's been tested, I'll say that again, if it's been tested, you are far more prepared than any of these acronym tools that you can come along with. And so those are the two I tend to highlight the most. What about you?
No, I think we're spot on. Really, extended detection and response is the one that I always like to highlight and phone in on as well. I think there's a little bit of a marketing misnomenclature around all of those those acronyms that end in DR. And I think there's a handful of customers that think they're getting one thing, but the reality is they're getting another. And it is because of that lack of the visibility. I mean, let's kind of drill down into that, as we talk about extended to, endpoint detection and response. I think, for lack of a better term, that's been kind of a marketing term that's been used to kind of maybe remove the words antivirus or anti-malware. It's a summation of those. It's really the next generation of what antivirus looks like. You and I are pretty familiar with managed detection and response, and I think any vendor that sells some form of endpoint detection and response or an antivirus solution says they have a managed detection and response. But I think the thing that you and I have talked about and honed in on is really that is only seeing a certain part of your business. That might only be seeing the end user's computers. It doesn't see the traffic that's happening on the network. Many vendors will say that's network detection and response now versus endpoint detection and response. And so I think you and I have been in alignment before about the extended detection response. What it's really a fancy way of saying is I'm going to take all this data from all my security tools, whether that's my spam filter, my firewall logs, my endpoints and their antivirus that's running, my network devices and the traffic that's going on. And extended detection and response is really an overlay on top of all of that. And I, again, marketing terms at large here, but you hear, I think everybody's heard single pane of glass before as a selling factor on some application. But it really is a single pane of glass from the engineer side of things, from the technical side of view. It is a single pane of glass. And I think that's important because that allows, whether it's your in-house security team, your IT director, your technology team, or, an outsourced security team, to have a single visible path as to what is going on currently inside of the environment and how threats potentially are moving unilaterally through that environment when an attack does occur. I was actually just on a call earlier this morning with a customer and, talking through this with them, we talked about one of the things of like a brand reputation situation that XDR can help prevent. If there is a vulnerability that occurs inside of your environment, you have to report what was touched. Well, if you can say no customer data was touched, I don't know, we can debate whether the rules on if it's okay that they have to alert that they've been breached or not. That's a debatable topic for another time. But at this point in time, they don't have to say that they've been breached if they can prove that no customer data was touched and breached. And so having that map to understand when an incident occurs, what's happening, where the threat's hiding, and how to block and clean that threat, I think is kind of an important perspective. And I put together this because, it does really hit on some of those points that we had discussed about the kind of overarching capabilities of XDR, but it really does dig into, enhanced incident response, that improved visibility and insight, better management of threats. It also can bring in, as we talked about earlier, all those SaaS applications, those software as a service applications that you're utilizing. Now I can see if a log on to our Salesforce environment is getting beat up by brute force attacks, things like that. So it does allow you to see outside of that classic castle and moat motif that we've used in security for so long when we were back on-prem. I guess to take that a step forward, Rick, as we talk about compliancy standards, I hear XDR get confused with like log retention. So kind of let's move into really, you know, log retention and who where that fits, who's the right fit for log retention, and how that's is a little bit fundamentally different than just knowing what's going on inside of the environment at all times.
Yeah, I think when you look at the DRs, the doctors, or whatever you want to call them, they've kind of just level set themselves, right? NDR, network detection response, started, and it's still very core to what we have, but a lot of that solutioning has now gone into your firewall solutions. And then take that up a level. Endpoint detection response has really leveled up and is able to do digital fingerprinting because it tags in from your endpoints into the network. Level that up. One of the ones that we're seeing now that is kind of new is cloud detection response, so CDR. And then that's leading into the managed detection and response, where it's kind of consuming all of those into what you see here is the security information and events management tool, or the SIEM. However, the XDR tool was created to be able to say, okay, all of these other tools are doing behavioral analytics and correlating data for us, including the SIEM, including the log retention, including the log aggregations. But now I want to be able to push one button and have all of my security tools block and tackle. And that's where XDR was super, super important. And honestly, the big providers, Palo, Cisco, Cato, they have really come up with a really cool XDR package, because if you buy all of the products, you know, the Fortinets, the Versas, if you buy all of their products, you get a true XDR. Single button fixes the problem across every solution that you have. But then you take it further to log retention, to your SOC as a service, your security operations center as a service. They're there to automate and orchestrate the response in a more meaningful way. And then they layer in a new XDR solution that is far different than what those other ones are, and far different than what the security incident and log management tools are doing. And what they're doing is they're tapping into API integrations to allow for that single click to solve the problem with your current security solutions. That does lend itself into another security problem, is, are you securing those APIs? But that's definitely an acronym for another day. So
Yeah. And to dig into the log management side of that, you know, I see more customers under, you know, some sort of compliance avenue that are really log holding or log storing. You think of that classically associated in, I would say the biggest industry is the banking industry. We've got to hold on to logs for X amount of years, or hold on to some of that logarithmic data as part of that all. I think the one thing for the benefit of a lot of these security vendors is it allows them to kind of understand what's going on in your environment. Is it anomalous, or is it stuff that happens normally? And it just might not be the same that happens in other environments. And you touched on it with the SOC part, but you know, customers that are really down deep in the weeds have mentioned SOAR a few times. You know, from your perspective, I think that's kind of, we talk about pie in the sky, and I think SOAR is kind of one of those pie in the sky, like having applications react, having accounts getting locked out automatically when, you know, we see anomalous traffic coming from a device. Describe to me a little bit more about your experience with that, what you've seen, and see customers' progressions from, at the end of the day, EDR antivirus all the way up to a SOAR type of environment.
yeah, I think the big thing is that a lot of customers, even the big enterprise customers, they go out and purchase a SIEM. Doesn't matter which one, we could list all of them on this show. And then they go and purchase an additional SOAR, and they try to put those together themselves. And ultimately, at its core, a security incident events manager is taking in all of the logs from your various solutions and putting them into a single pane of glass, for lack of a better word, and correlating everything using machine learning to really identify behavior. And then the SOAR is, okay, if this happens, if this is a true positive and this is the case, what can we automate using additional machine learning models to respond without having to have a human get woke up in the middle of the night? The biggest issue is both of those tools, when purchased, takes a lot of training, and there's a lot of drift, and there's a lot of playbooks. And so what people miss is, what if I could hire the people and the service to bring me whatever SIM they want that meets my compliance requirements, to bring me whatever playbooks they've built because they've built hundreds or thousands of them for other customers? That's the step that I think a lot of people miss, even if it's just a professional service, because I have seen the SOAR platform be the reason that people survive an attack more than the human in the SOC when it's all said and done. Because if that's set up correctly, man, I wake up the next morning and my house, the firefighters already put the fire out, and the insurance company is already there telling me, here's what we're going to give you to fix your house. And that's all been done by the SOAR for the cybersecurity front.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to note. I'm sure, Rick, you and I have both heard this many times from peers and customers and vendors is, we have a security team. They're going to handle it. I think, and I think you would probably agree, even if you have an in-house security team, I think there's always room to layer on a third-party security team with that. Maybe potentially, if you're within that Fortune 300, Fortune 500, you might be able to build a security team that is on par with some of the vendors that can work with you. But I think everybody down market from that really is looking to partner with some sort of security team out there to really help guide them through this.
I actually heard a really interesting stat. Of the Fortune 100, there is less than less than 3 that have their own internal security operations center that uses no third-party MSSP for that component. There are 0 that do not use some form of managed service elsewhere. So that's pretty impressive. I would have to dig into what those numbers look like from a standpoint of what they're actually using. Is it pen testing? Is it scanning? Is it patch management? Is it those things? But yeah, so 3 of the 100 use no third-party security services. That's insane. And 0 use no form of of managed services. Like all 100 use some form of managed service somewhere else. So.
Well, I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of these acronyms. So, I think this is the $1 million question that you and I get day in and day out is, where do we start? And I think that's a loaded question. I think you would agree with that as well. I think the key is probably evaluation at some level is when you really say, where do you start? It's evaluating the frameworks that best fit your industry. It's evaluating what you want those business outcomes to be. And then the next step involved with that is understanding where you are today. Get a third-party security gap assessment. Get a pen test or a vulnerability scan. We know that, the unfortunate part about those is they're kind of a point-in-time snapshot, and they're great today. I have a funny anecdote. A couple of years ago when that Log4j released, I had a customer that did a pen test a week prior to the Log4j release, and their pen test looked amazing. I can tell you that pen test did not look so hot the week after the Log4j. So, understand that they're a point-in-time snapshot of where you are, but that's great because you don't know where you need to go if you don't know where you're starting from. And I have one here, self-assessment, which is, I think, the next thing that we're kind of going to get into a little bit. I was actually unaware of this matrix that I'm going to show you here in the next couple of slides until I met Rick. I was always working to say, okay, how can I align somebody with the NIST framework? Well, the NIST framework is super overarching if you just take it by its, 5 parts, and not really enough down in the weeds. And you look at like MITRE, a little too down in the weeds, a little, if you try to map to MITRE, on an hour-long phone call, good luck. You're going to struggle to map to the MITRE framework in a single conversation. But Rick, you turned me on to mapping to a matrix called the Cyber Defense Matrix, and I'd love for you to talk about it. I sat in a session a couple of years ago with you where you first showed this, and I think I know you have a little more history about it. So tell me a little bit more about the Cyber Defense Matrix, and for the customers that are sitting on this podcast, help them understand what's the point of the Cyber Defense Matrix.
Yeah, so credit to Sunil Yu, as you see there. When Sunil Yu was with Bank of America, he kept going to his vendors and saying, I need to fill this gap in my environment. And every vendor said, we could do that. We could do that. It initially started with he went to his SD-WAN vendors and said, I need to be able to understand how my endpoints can be used to identify my users, especially using Microsoft. And interestingly enough, his SD-WAN provider, his network provider said, we can do that. And he's like, no, you can't. So he created this, and he went with the initial framework at the time of the Cybersecurity Framework 1.0. And he said, every solution on the market has a primary reason for that solution working for the customer. There's a primary reason for it to have been brought to market, but the for the customer part is the key. So you see here, right? Managed endpoint detection and response is the easiest one to talk about. Before, Chris mentioned that this was an antivirus. Antivirus was used to identify and then ultimately protect known bads. But when we created the managed endpoint detection and response, that moved from identify and partially protect to, by design, it's protecting the antivirus component. The endpoint detection and response is now detecting bad actions through behavioral analytics, and the managed part allows us to respond accordingly. And that is now filling 3 boxes of the gap. What we have done, and what we've done for Christopher and for others, is we've actually aligned a lot of these with the maturity levels that NIST has put out there. So what you see here is minimum requirements to meet maturity level 1, having a next-gen firewall, patching your operating systems, doing regular vulnerability scans, even if it is a moment in time, multi-factor authentication. So we see these things as important, but you'll notice that there are still gaps, right? And you're also going to notice that at maturity level 1, there's very few places that you see defense in depth, that you see multiple line items in these solutions. And that's okay, but this is the starting point. And so we're starting to see people look at this from a self-assessment, because they can look at this and go, I can put everything in the right place. I can then move forward with a roadmap because I see the gaps, right? You notice the biggest gap on here is the application or cloud layer. NIST doesn't even touch that until level 3. So we have to be mindful that the maturity levels are a little bit fluctual.
Yeah, and I think one of the nice things about this is while there are a couple of acronyms here and there, it tends to stay away from those kind of industry or marketing acronyms. This is really down more in maybe product or feature set. Is it or capability? Yeah. And I implore anybody that watches this, sit down and place this against your infrastructure. Take this map, and instead of putting security awareness training, I've sat with customers where we write in on those boxes what they're utilizing today, so that you actually have a full view. I think sometimes we get a lot of products, and security is very product heavy. It's buy one more thing, one more thing will make you more secure. Sometimes I question if that's true, but also I think it tends to be widget driven. So you lose sight of kind of your end goal because you're down in the weeds. Buy this for this, buy this for that, and this allows you at a glance, if you replace the industry terms on this map, allows you at a glance to really understand where you are, what boxes you have a gap in, and how you can move forward in filling those gaps and holes. And we talk about this as kind of being minimum standards. Rick, I think you and I get asked a lot about, hey, I've got cyber liability coming up. How can I save money? They're going to they're going to put the spurs to me and turn up the cost on my rider. You know, what can we do? How can we make this more palatable? Or I get people often as well that says, I don't even know that we're going to meet these minimum standards, and then they're afraid about being kicked off. And another industry colleague of ours shared a fun phrase that I have kind of stolen from him, called the lie to comply. So it's, you know, stretching some of that truth to say, oh, well, you know, I've got MFA over here in some places. So when the box comes up on your cyber insurance overview, I've got MFA, check the box. I can say I did it. But the reality is, and you and I have talked about this with customers as well, is you know, the question becomes, are you looking to check a box, or are you looking to really get your mileage out of the application? Because those are two different, first off, those are two different products potentially at that point.
Yeah.
But also this allows you to really map to that and understand where your gaps are. And to kind of hit on that, how to know what you're missing or where you're going, you had talked about that being minimum standards. Listen, this is the eye chart here. This is aspirational industry goal. This is compliance. If you have any sort of kind of industry compliance, think PCI, ISO 2700, 2701, think NIST, CMMC, ITAR, FedRAMP, but also, you know, some of these are insurance capability as well. So, you know, really, I think this is probably the aspirational goal that everybody wants to use. So map to the minimum standards, but then start to kind of go back to your vendors, understand, is there some ability to get a little more out of the product? Can it fill one of these other spots on here? I mean, Rick, talk me through some of the things that you think are standouts on this aspirational insurance compliance, or where you think maybe in the past that you've seen really bang for the buck on a customer side. Where do they get the most mileage? I mean, I think we established EDR, MDR initially for customers in the first few steps of their security journey, get a lot of bang for their buck out of that product. Where do you see the next bang for your buck product, you know, as we get deeper into this?
I mean, I think there's a couple on here. I think, like you mentioned, we talked about managed endpoint detection response and MDR. Any type of endpoint detection response or managed EDR is going to be the fastest way for you to have both digital asset inventory, fast response against ransomware, ability to block and tackle during an incident. It's simple and it's easy and it's cost effective. I mean, today it's $6 to $10 per device per month, depending on how the management looks. It includes incident response. So I really do think that's the first and foremost, the easiest way to have a secure posture. The second one for me, and this is really starting to take legs this year, is managed patching. I think people have traditionally done vulnerability scans and they have an internal person patch their operating systems once a month or once a week. Managed patching with very specific SLAs will allow you not to have any of the issues that we've seen. No offense to CrowdStrike and Microsoft and the issue that happened there, but those that had an MSSP who was doing managed patching tested it before they let their customers go live. They never saw the blue screen of death. The third one is disaster recovery. I think people forget that recovery and SLAs around return time to the organization are actually more important than anything proactive, even though the insurance industry and the compliance industries say, let's lean towards protect to the left, anything left of the boom, as we call it, or the attack. But the disaster recovery and immutable backups, unbelievable, the best return on investment if you get attacked. And then finally, this one's a weird one. It's a small one right there on the bottom under users and identify. It's IGA, Identity Governance Administration. Here's what I hear from tons of customers. We have a hard time onboarding, making sure that our employees have the right accesses, even if we have access control policies in place. How can we monitor this? How can we make sure as they get transferred to new roles that they don't have administrative credentials, that we're privileging them correctly? And more importantly, how do we do this identity governance when we have to offboard someone? And so that is such a cost-effective tool that your HR team might actually help you pay for. So
Yeah, I mean, I think for a while there's been some nomenclature mistakes on the backup side of things. We refer to it as backups or cloud backups or disaster recovery. I've been using a phrase that the industry has coined kind of maybe like 6, 7 years ago, business continuity. And that's really what it's about. That's about the DR side of things. That's about the backup. That's really understanding what it takes from all the technology perspective around what you're required to do for the continuity of the business to keep it up and running, what you can live with, what you can't live with when you are either under attack. And we've used kind of attack as a framework for this, but that doesn't, attacks don't always mean the same thing. They can look very different. We had this conversation the other day. If you were to take that question and flip it, what do you see on this list that, quite frankly, is a pain to implement or painful to get there, and maybe should be kind of those last aspirational items, those kind of bigger pie in the sky goals, because they are so difficult to get implemented, or they take a lot of training either on the IT or the end user side? I mean, I can tell you, I know Pam, we've talked about that before. It's a lot of work. It's great to have, but it is a lot of work, and that's privileged access management, basically allowing users to request to be able to install an application or request to be able to get elevated privilege versus carte blanche just giving them elevated privilege. And then there's curated lists of applications that are approved and not approved, but it becomes very noisy. We oftentimes in this industry use the words alert fatigue. That is an alert fatigue monster. You see lots of alerts come out for approving applications that may not be on the application approved list. Is there anything else on here that you see as kind of being one of those items where great to have, but wouldn't prioritize it?
yeah, I think there's two. One is it great to have and you should prioritize it. That's SD-WAN or SASE. It is extremely difficult to actually grow that, especially if you're running hybrid cloud. However, the analytics alone and the ability to link all of the solutions that you need from an SD-WAN or a SASE secure access service edge solution are lights out. But if you're a 100-site company, building out an SD-WAN solution is going to probably take you 18 months. And so that's tough. It's a timing issue, not so much a costing issue. But the one on here that always frustrates me the most is when somebody says, I need a plan for DLP, data loss prevention, and I need tools for it. And I always say, hold on. You want to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a single tool that says it can do all of these cool data loss prevention things. Have you checked your current systems? I bet you 70 to 80% of what that tool is going to give you can be done with your systems. Firewalls, at least 20 to 30% of what the firewalls do can be turned on to make it a data loss prevention. Email security, huge DLP, especially if you're doing it for file integrity, right? If you've classified your data correctly, DLP solutions are kind of a novelty because there's a lot of other things that have already layered it in. So for me, DLP is data loss prevention is the big one on here that I just think is step back. So
yeah, I also think that depends on what platform you're in. I'll tell you, if you're if you're heavy in the Microsoft ecosystem, they have really created the Staples Easy button on a lot of the DLP platform.
yeah.
It stretches across Microsoft Teams. It stretches across Office 360, all the Office 365 feature sets, so email. But identity. The other really neat place that they stretch that across, though, is the SharePoint environment. So for customers that have decided to go cloud storage for files, the next easy switch, if you're in a highly regulated industry, is to turn on that DLP. And the nice thing that Microsoft has done is seen into these tenants across thousands of customers, probably hundreds of thousands of customers at this point, and have created best practice rules for some of these industries, whether you're financial, banking, there's some security, there's some ones on the government cloud side of thing for government DLP policies. And so there is a level of easy button that can be hit for some of those. But I think the other thing as well is, with any of this eye chart that we see here today, I think it's always important to note that there is always somebody that will help you come in and 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 help you build this. You don't have to necessarily feel like you're on the hook to have a managed product the whole way through its life cycle if you just want assistance with coming in and helping DLP get set up, or for instance, helping architect that SD-WAN SASE environment. It's interesting that you bring up the SD-WAN SASE environment with kind of the black eye in the past few months that both Fortinet and SonicWall have taken. We talk about VPN users and how basically SonicWall and Fortinet at the time that their 0-day came out, they were recommending directly turn off your VPN. And you talked about everybody's working in some sort of hybrid environment at this point. It's difficult. There are organizations that have sent large swaths of their people home to work from home long term. And so the advisement from a security perspective, how do you weigh our business needs to keep running, but the manufacturer of these products has basically told us turn off your VPN in the short term to keep yourself safe. So, I think things like SDP, software defined perimeter, it's really the new way to say a VPN style solution. But really, when a customer comes in, or when a user comes into your environment, gating what they can get access to based on who they are, where they're connecting from, or even to get super down in the weeds, what's going on with their machine. Is it a company device? Is it a personal device? If it's a personal device, is it running up-to-date antivirus on that personal device? Is it running security tools that we deem correct for that?
One thing I'll add to that, Chris, is a big push in 2025. We all understand that we need to identify users on our network. It's ongoing, never going away. But now we're having to identify two additional things. One, we've kind of played in that field, but it's devices, right? It's unique devices that we just can't, it's digital fingerprinting. But now it's AI. We now have unique AI entities, whether it's agentic bots, whether it's just software as a service. And that has become a huge component of the identity structure that most people forget about, because it's not on the cyber defense matrix yet. It's not in the acronym soup conversation. Yet, if you were to look at your environment, you probably have some form of bot or unique entity that you can't identify the user or the device because it's neither. And so, not trying to scare people some more. We obviously have done some of that already, but it's an interesting conundrum.
No, but I think, I always say that technology is cyclical. You look at mainframe to remote desktop to now Windows 365. It's the kind of the same thought process, just reimagined throughout the years. I kind of see that the same way as these unknown entities. You talk about the AI platform, but 10 years ago, we were having the same conversation, but it was about OT, IoT. It was all these devices on the network that were not running Windows, that we couldn't install an antivirus on. Well, how do we protect those devices? And I mean, I think, what is it? Target has the biggest conundrum in their history with that, with allowing a breach through an IoT device that was controlling HVAC into their data center. And I think those are things that, as users become more accustomed to all of those things, people have Ring and Blink doorbells at home. They have, Govee lights. They have Alexas. we're seeing those types of things move into the office space a lot more, and it's really is, how do we protect them, and what are the reputable sources that they're coming from, and things along those lines. So I think really you hit it spot on with that.
I think everyone should have to go to DEF CON once and just learn proper security protocols or end up on the wall of shame. So,
Well, and I think Rick, we've seen a big change in our industry as well. We've seen that, initially, I think the sales tactic for security was scare instead of partner. And I think everybody in this industry has taken a step back. I think everybody's scared enough of already,
yeah.
Even in the little bit that they know, everybody's scared enough that they're looking out for these things. So now it's really about, how can you find somebody that's the right partner and work with them to really help you. And they may not have all the answers, but at least they can help start to give a level of guidance, sit down with you, help work to mapping to the cyber defense matrix. I mean, that's something that in the day job that I do for hire, that I do all the time. And I think you as well with Avant, you sit down with many customers and really help them kind of roadmap what this looks like. And, you might not have something for every single one of these boxes on the cyber defense matrix, but at least you can provide some direction on which way to go. I know we're getting a little bit close to time here, but this is just a few of the vendors that I think are out there in the marketplace that can help customers with the needs that we talked about today, and with the concerns and planning and things along those lines. And I'm just going to throw up my last slide, which is the Q&A slide. If anybody that's watching live wants to throw up any Q&A questions, certainly you can post them in the Q&A area, and they should come through. But as we wait for those to come through, Rick, I'll ask you kind of a twofold question. What do you see for 2026 that's going to be the new kind of shiny security thing that everybody's going to want? That'll be my first question to you.
Yeah, I think people have moved from scare because of the partner tactics that you've talked about. Partners are now partnering, trusting each other. But we're seeing FOMO, fear of missing out. So I'm going to throw another acronym out there, because this is what we started with, fear of missing out. And so people are jumping into the artificial intelligence world and forgetting that artificial intelligence has been with us 30 plus years. The difference is it's now generative and it's now agentic. And I think in 2026, it's not going to be about rushing to missing out, that, oh my God, I have to get some form of AI because my board's telling me. It's going to be about tactical artificial intelligence use, and realizing the difference between what I can do to automate and save return on investment with machine learning workflows, and actually using the right Gen AI to make my business have a competitive advantage. That's the difference. And that could lean into security specifically by saying, I want to create an agentic AI security bot who is the ideal security operation center robot, not human, who's going to do 80% of our response and do it far better than you or I could do. So I think that's going to happen in 2026, tactical artificial intelligence.
And what do you think is going to be, because this industry is kind of rife with, when something new comes in, it seems like something falls by the wayside or falls off of the chart. What do you think is going to be the thing that, by the end of 2026, we sit here and have another one of these and we say, man, we used to talk about insert this acronym here all the time, and now it's kind of gone away. What do you think is going to be the acronym that disappears off of the eye chart in the next year?
I think we're going to start seeing firewalls disappear. And I think here's why. We're going to start seeing SD-WAN. People are moving off of MPLS networks. We're going to start seeing the web application firewalls. We're going to see secure web gateways because more people are going to hybrid cloud. I don't think we'll ever remove firewalls. I think that's a core foundation of most businesses, but that is going to be something that I would say at least 50 to 60% of the companies are going, I don't need a firewall. I'm not on-prem. All my workers work remote. I just need some form of secure web gateway for them to access all of my software as a service. And we're going to start seeing secure web gateway, zero trust network access, and cloud access security broker overtake the FW acronym that we see on there now.
Yeah, I think, as those assets that we were always trying to protect by putting the firewall on site. Hey, I've got this great firewall on site because all of my servers sit behind it. And, I think the industry used to use like a castle and moat or castle defense type of mindset. But if you think about it, with so much more going into public cloud and going into SaaS applications, the reality is where do your castle walls or your moat actually start? And I think like you had said, that firewall, that old school mentality of that next gen firewall has kind of been replaced by, we need to bump our secure edge out further. I need to be able to put my security around these SaaS applications or public cloud or private cloud that's not hosted by myself, but in somebody else's data center facility. Those are all really big factors at play.
I think the castle and moat is interesting because every movie that I've ever watched about medieval times, other than Monty Python, has shown them simply finding a way through the front gate because it's open and there's people walking through and the guards are overrun. And it's like, okay, so you got a big castle wall and you got a huge moat, but unless you know that attack is coming, you can't close your gate in time. And so, I don't know, I've watched Robin Hood recently and they basically just hid in a hay bale and went right through the front door. So that's what we're seeing, right? So,
well, I guess there is a reason that that they call them Trojan horses, right?
True, true.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you being on with me. I have some exciting news. We're going to have a industry roundtable, so we're going to have a handful of other people from the security world on this in 2 weeks. Rick will be back with myself, and we're just going to kind of have an industry roundtable with some other security experts. So please feel free. Continue to post questions on the Q&A as time goes on. We will address those as part of the next episode. But I appreciate everybody's time today, and appreciate you, Rick, for jumping on with me.
Thank you.
Thanks.